People think working security at a shopping mall is the easiest job in the world. They imagine you just sit in a booth, eating donuts and watching movies on your phone. And honestly, for the first few months, that's exactly what it was. I took the job because I was in college and needed quiet time to study. The mall was a massive, sprawling complex in Ohio, one of those places that was built in the 90s and was slowly losing business. By day, it was sad. By night, it was something else entirely. A mall after hours is a liminal space. It feels wrong. It's a place designed for thousands of people, noise, music, and commerce. When you take all the people away, the silence doesn't just feel empty. It feels heavy. It presses against your ears. The only sounds are the hum of the vending machines and the rhythmic thumping of the HVAC system on the roof, which sounds like a giant heart beating in the distance. My patrol route was simple. I had to walk the entire perimeter of the second floor every 2 hours, scanning QR codes at specific checkpoints to prove I was actually doing my job. The route took me past the food court, the cinema, and the high-end fashion wing. That wing was always the creepiest. It had skylights, and on nights with a full moon, the pale light would filter down and illuminate the mannequins in the store windows, making them look like a frozen army. There was one store in particular, a boutique called Eclat, that always gave me a bad feeling. They had these hyper-realistic mannequins, not the faceless white plastic ones you see at department stores. These had skin texture, glass eyes, and real hair. There was one mannequin in the front display, a woman in a red evening gown, that I swear used to track me with her eyes. It was a Tuesday night in November. The mall was dead. Outside, a storm was brewing, and the wind was howling against the skylights, making the metal frames groan. I started my 2 a.m. round. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast to drown out the creepy, settling noises of the building. I walked past Eclat. I did my usual routine. Flash my light on the lock, check the handle, scan the code. The mannequin in the red dress was there, standing on her pedestal in the center of the window display. She was posed with one hand on her hip, looking straight out into the hallway. I remember looking at her and thinking how expensive that dress must be. Everything was normal. I finished the loop and went back to the security office. I watched the monitors for a while. The cameras in this place were old and grainy, providing black and white feeds that made everything look like a horror movie. Around 3:15 a.m., I noticed something on the monitor for Sector 4, the fashion wing. The camera was positioned at the end of the hall looking down towards Eclat. In the grainy footage, the window display looked empty. I squinted at the screen. The contrast was terrible, so it was hard to tell. I assumed the mannequin had fallen over. They are heavy, but if they aren't balanced right, the vibrations from the storm could have tipped her. I sighed, grabbed my mag light, and headed back out. I didn't want to explain to the morning manager why a $3,000 dummy was shattered on the floor. The walk back to Sector 4 felt longer than usual. The air in the mall had grown colder, likely a draft from the storm. As I approached the store, I shined my beam into the window display. My stomach dropped. The mannequin hadn't fallen over. She was gone. The pedestal was empty. I stood there for a moment, my brain trying to rationalize it. Did someone break in? I checked the glass doors, locked tight. I checked the alarm panel inside the glass. Green light. Armed. If anyone had opened that door, the sirens would have woken up the whole county. Maybe maintenance moved it? No. Maintenance left at midnight. I unlocked the door with my master key. I know, protocol says you call the police first, but I didn't want to call the cops for a missing doll if it was just a prank by a coworker. I stepped inside the store. The smell hit me first. It smelled like expensive perfume, strong, floral, and overwhelming. It shouldn't have smelled that fresh in a store that had been closed for 6 hours. Security, I called out. My voice cracked. Is anyone in here? Silence. Just the wind rattling the glass front. I slowly swept my flashlight across the store. Racks of clothes cast long, stretching shadows that looked like grasping fingers. I checked behind the counter. Nothing. Then I heard a sound coming from the back near the changing rooms. It was the sound of fabric rustling. Swish, swish, like a dress dragging across a carpet. I unholstered my taser. Come out, now! I crept toward the back. The changing room area was a narrow corridor with mirrors on both sides. As I turned the corner, my flashlight beam hit the mirror at the end of the hall. And there she was, the mannequin in the red dress. She was standing in front of the last changing room. But she wasn't facing the mirror. She was facing me. And she wasn't in the same pose. Her arms were raised, reaching out, her plastic fingers spread wide. But the worst part, the part that made me turn and run, was her face. In the window, her expression had been a neutral plastic stare. Now her mouth was open, wide open, unnaturally wide, like a snake unhinging its jaw. And inside that plastic mouth, there was darkness. I didn't investigate further. I didn't check for wires or animatronics. I backed out of that corridor, slammed the front door, locked it, and sprinted back to the office. I locked myself in and stared at the monitors until the sun came up. When the morning manager arrived, I told him I quit. I didn't give a reason. As I was walking out to my car, I passed the window of Eclat one last time from the outside. The mannequin was back on her pedestal, one hand on her hip, looking straight ahead. But as I walked by, I swear I saw condensation on the inside of the glass right in front of her face. A small, foggy patch of steam. Plastic doesn't breathe. Interaction. Hook. I know how crazy this sounds. I've tried to convince myself it was a prank or hallucination from sleep deprivation, but I can't explain the open mouth. If you were alone in a massive building and saw a statue move, would you have gone inside to check like I did? Or are you smarter than me? Tell me in the comments. I work at a logistics distribution center on the outskirts of Detroit. To give you an idea of the scale, this place is a behemoth. It's a quarter-mile long from the loading docks to the back wall. It's essentially a massive cavern of corrugated steel and concrete, filled with endless rows of towering metal shelves stacked 40 feet high with car parts. During the day, the place is deafening. Forklifts beeping, conveyor belts humming, guys shouting over the noise of impact drills. But at night, on the weekend shift, it becomes a tomb. The silence in a building that big is unnatural. You can hear the building settling, the metal beams groan and pop as the temperature drops, and the wind whistling through the loading dock seals sounds like someone whispering your name. I sit in a glass-enclosed command center on a mezzanine that overlooks the floor. My job is monitoring the fire systems and the intrusion alarms. We have a motion sensor system that covers the aisles. It's old, finicky, and prone to false alarms. We call it chasing ghosts. Usually it's a bird that got in through a vent or a stray cat, or sometimes a plastic tarp flapping in the draft. But there is one section of the warehouse that everyone hates. Sector 4. Sector 4 is the dead stock area. It's the deepest part of the warehouse, furthest from the office. The lighting there is terrible. Half the sodium vapor bulbs are burnt out, casting everything in a sickly, flickering yellow haze. We keep heavy engine blocks and discontinued parts back there. Nobody goes there unless they absolutely have to. Last Saturday, around 3:15 a.m., the board lit up. Beep. Motion detected, Sector 4, Aisle 32. I looked up from my book. I waited for it to clear. Usually, a sensor trips once and resets. Beep. Motion detected, Sector 4, Aisle 32. Beep. Motion detected, Sector 4, Aisle 33. Whatever it was moving. And it was moving methodically, going from one aisle to the next. I sighed, grabbed the heavy set of keys and my high-beam flashlight. I couldn't just ignore a moving target. It could be a meth head trying to steal copper wire. It happens. The walk to Sector 4 takes about 10 minutes. As I walked away from the lit office, the darkness seemed to wrap around me. The air got colder. The smell of the factory changed, from the smell of floor wax and coffee near the front, to the smell of old grease, cold concrete, and stagnant dust in the back. When I reached the edge of Sector 4, I killed the main lights on my radio to see if I could spot a flashlight beam from an intruder. Total darkness. Silence. I clicked my flashlight on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the air. "Security!" I yelled. My voice echoed, bouncing off the metal walls. Security, curity, itty. No answer. I walked down the main thoroughfare toward Aisle 32. The sensors were silent now. I turned into the aisle, sweeping my light left and right. Pallets of rusty engine blocks sat wrapped in plastic. Nothing disturbed. No rats, no birds. I was about to radio in a false alarm when I looked down at the floor. The concrete floor in Sector 4 hasn't been scrubbed in years. It is covered in a thick uniform layer of gray industrial dust. If a rat runs across it, you see the trail. Right in the center of the aisle, directly under the motion sensor, was a mark. I walked closer and shone my light directly on it. My breath hitched in my throat. It was a footprint, a single, human footprint. And it wasn't a boot print. It was a bare foot. I stared at it, my brain trying to process the information. It was perfect. I could see the imprint of the heel, the arch, and 5 distinct toes. But the most terrifying part wasn't the shape. It was the fact that it was wet. The concrete was dark with moisture. The edges of the print were still soaking into the dry dust. It was fresh. Someone had stepped here seconds before I arrived. I spun around, shining my light behind me. "Come out." Nothing. I looked back at the floor. That was when the panic really set in. There was only one footprint. I scanned the dust for 20 feet in every direction. The gray layer was undisturbed. There were no prints leading to this spot, and no prints leading away. It was as if a soaking wet, barefoot human had dropped from the ceiling, landed on one foot, and then vanished into thin air. I slowly tilted my head up. I shined my beam into the rafters, 40 feet above. It was a maze of steel girders and darkness. I couldn't see anything up there. But then a single drop of liquid fell from the darkness. Plip. It hit the shoulder of my uniform. I didn't look to see what it was. I didn't wait to see if a second drop would fall. The primal part of my brain screamed, "Run!" I sprinted back to the command center. I locked the door and pulled up the camera feed for Sector 4. The camera is mounted high up, giving a fisheye view. I rewound the footage to 3:15 a.m. I watched the screen. The aisle was empty. Then the sensor light blinked, but there was no one there. I watched for another minute, and then I saw it. It wasn't on the floor. High up in the top corner of the screen, on top of the highest rack of shelves, something moved. It was just a shadow, darker than the surroundings. It looked like a long, pale limb, too long to be a human arm, reaching down from the rafters. It hung there for a second, dripping something onto the floor, and then retracted back up into the gloom of the ceiling, just as I came around the corner with my flashlight. I requested a transfer the next day. They asked me why. I told them I developed asthma and couldn't handle the dust. I lied. I just know that whatever is living in the rafters of Sector 4 hasn't left. And sometimes, when it rains, I can still feel that cold drop hitting my shoulder. Interaction hook. The scariest part for me wasn't the footprint, it was the lack of a trail. It defies physics. I want to ask the security guards and night shift workers watching this. If you found a single wet footprint in a dusty room, with no way in or out, what would be your theory? Did they fall? Or were they hanging? Let me know your theories below. I've been the night watchman at Oak Ridge Cemetery for 6 years. And my answer is always the same. The dead are the best neighbors you could ask for. They don't make noise, they don't complain, and they certainly don't try to break into the maintenance shed to steal copper wire. It's the living you have to worry about. Teenagers looking for a place to drink, vandals trying to knock over headstones, or homeless folks looking for a quiet place to sleep. That is 99% of the job. But I can't talk about the other 1%. That 1% is the reason I don't patrol the North Sector after 3:00 a.m. anymore. The North Sector is the active burial ground. It's where the fresh plots are. The ground there is soft, unsettled. It smells different than the rest of the cemetery, a mix of wet clay, turned earth, and the sickly sweet scent of wilting funeral flowers. It was a Tuesday in late October. A heavy storm had passed through earlier in the evening, leaving the air thick with fog and the ground sodden. I was in my truck drinking lukewarm coffee, listening to the rain drip off the trees. Around 2:45 a.m., I decided to do a foot patrol. The truck's headlights were too conspicuous, and if there were kids hiding in the dark, I wanted to catch them by surprise. I grabbed my heavy mag light, zipped up my jacket, and stepped out into the mist. The silence in a cemetery is unique. It's a heavy, muffled silence. The fog dampens sound. I was walking along the gravel path that borders the north sector. I stopped to light a cigarette. That's when I heard it. Scrape. It was faint. A dull, wet sound. I froze. I held my breath, letting the smoke drift out of my mouth. Scrape. Thump. It sounded exactly like a shovel hitting dirt. Heavy, rhythmic, and deliberate. My first thought was anger. Grave robbers, I thought. It sounds medieval, but people actually do dig up graves to steal jewelry or, God forbid, bones for some ritual. It happens more than you think. I clicked off my flashlight. I knew the layout by heart. I crept off the gravel path and onto the grass to silence my footsteps. The fog was swirling around my ankles. Scrape. Thump. The sound was getting louder. It was coming from a plot that had been filled just that afternoon. I remembered the funeral. It was a small service for an older man. I moved behind a large oak tree about 30 feet from the fresh grave. I peered around the bark, expecting to see two guys with shovels and a lantern. But there was no light. There were no silhouettes. I squinted into the gloom. The mound of fresh dirt was visible in the ambient moonlight. It was piled high, covered in wreaths and bouquets of lilies. There was nobody there. The area was completely empty. I waited. Maybe they heard me. Maybe they were hiding behind a headstone. Then, it happened again. Scrape. But this time, I realized something that made the hair on my arm stand up. The sound wasn't coming from above the ground. It wasn't the sound of metal hitting dirt from the outside. It was a muffled, dull vibration. It was coming from under the pile of flowers. I stepped out from behind the tree. I couldn't help myself. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I walked slowly toward the grave, my unlit flashlight shaking in my hand. Scrape. Scrape. It sounded desperate now. Frantic. Like fingernails clawing at wood and packed earth. I was standing right at the foot of the grave. The smell of the lilies was overpowering. I could feel the vibration in the soles of my boots. Thump. Thump. My brain tried to rationalize it. Settling air pockets, a coffin collapsing. But coffins don't scratch. Coffins don't have a rhythm. I clicked my flashlight on. The beam hit the mound of dirt. The flowers were trembling. Not from the wind, there was no wind. They were shaking because the earth beneath them was shifting. And then right in the center of the mound, a small fissure opened in the soil. A clump of wet clay rolled down the side. I backed away. "Hello?" I whispered. I don't know why I whispered. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt like the grave was listening to me. I stood there for what felt like an hour but was probably 10 seconds. The beam of my light was fixed on that crack in the dirt. Then slowly, a hand didn't burst out. That happens in movies. Reality is subtler. In reality, the dirt just sank. The center of the grave collapsed inward about 6 inches with a soft whoosh of escaping air. And with that escaping air came a smell. It wasn't the smell of flowers or wet earth anymore. It was a stagnant, ancient smell of decay that hit me in the face like a physical blow. I didn't stick around to see what caused the collapse. I turned and ran. I ran all the way back to the truck, locked the doors, and peeled out of the cemetery, leaving the gate wide open. I called the groundskeeper the next morning. I told him I thought an animal had been digging at the new plot. He went to check it out. He called me back an hour later. He sounded weird on the phone. "You said an animal was digging?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied. "Looked like a coyote or something." "That's strange," he said, "because the dirt on top is undisturbed. The flowers are perfect, but the headstone, the heavy granite marker we set yesterday." "Yeah?" "It's moved. It's been pushed back about 3 inches, and there are mud marks on it." "Mud marks from paws?" I asked, hoping he would say yes. "No," he said quietly. "They look like palms, flat, human palms. But they're on the back of the stone, like someone was pushing against it for leverage. I still work at the cemetery. I have a mortgage to pay. But I don't go to the north sector at night. And whenever I walk past that grave during the day, I make sure to step quietly. I don't want to wake him up again. Interaction. Hook. There is a primal fear about being buried alive. Science says it's impossible in modern times, but I heard what I heard. If you were standing at that grave and saw the earth sinking, would you have started digging to help? Or would you have run like I did? Be honest. I won't judge you.